Well, you look down here, what I see.
Biden trying to establish a narrative on the campaign trail, but midterms are usually seen, at least in part, as a referendum on the party that controls the White House. Also on the trail, two former presidents, Obama and Trump, both of whom know firsthand how bruising midterms can be. And right now, our power rankings show Republicans are almost certain to win control of the House. The Senate, though, is still coming down to 4 toss-up races. Of course, all of this assumes that the polls are correct. And one pollster argues that Republicans often don't respond to surveys.
I've said from the very beginning, I think that the Republican turnout will exceed anything even we have predicted. So how big that wave is will yet to be seen because we just can't measure them.
But whatever the ultimate outcome, we may still be searching for answers on election night.
You might use emissions in any appreciable sense.
The comms director for Power of the Future, Larry Behrens, believes China is using the climate agenda to push its own geopolitical goals.
They're demanding that other countries pay a lot of money for climate change, saying that they need to step up to the plate to pay that $100 billion a year. But when it comes to shutting down coal, they say we're going to continue to do it. In fact, the U.S. President Joe Biden recently said just last week we're going to shut down coal plants across the United States for wind and solar. Well, who makes wind and solar equipment? That's China. And how do they do it? They do it with coal.
Behrens believes China is trying to put other countries at a disadvantage, especially the United States. Moving on, Apple is warning of lower shipments of iPhone 14 models. It's because of a significant production cut at a plant in China. And that's thanks to China's zero COVID policy. No surprise there. China today reported its highest number of new COVID-19 infections in 6 months. The factory in central China employs about 200,000 people, but many workers have fled in response to tight restrictions. The area where the factory is located entered a 7-day lockdown on Wednesday. Measures included barring residents from going out and only allowing access to approved vehicles. Apple expects revenue growth to slow this quarter. Goldman Sachs says China may still be months away from reopening. The country's sticking to its zero COVID policy, even though most of the world has moved on. Yesterday, economists at the bank said elderly vaccination rates in China are still low. They also said the death rates appear high among those unvaccinated. They cited Hong Kong data. Goldman thinks China might reopen in the second quarter of next year. It says a full reopening could drive Chinese stocks up 20%. If you have any news tips or feedback for the show, please email us at business.
It's taken us 4 or 5 years to just get to the environmental process, but it's emerging technology. It costs 20 cents on the dollar versus a surface road, so very cost effective. It's yet to start building. Yet they went to Nevada, and they already built the tunnel underneath the convention center, and they're on phase 2, and they've done that in the last 18 months. So these are my frustrations. We have fantastic companies here, great ideas, we have all this stuff, but our rules and regulations make it so cumbersome to do a job. And if you spend 30% of your capital money just on this environmental study and 5 or 6 years of prep, just think about the inflationary cost, what it costs us the 20 or 30% on top of that.
My guest today is Kurt Hagman, chairman of San Bernardino County Supervisors.
We have thousands of school districts throughout California, and I was starting to look at those just briefly. And my home school district gets about 2/3 what LA Unified gets per student. We have a tendency in California to give more money for failure than success. So when things go bad, we throw more money at it, which is kind of opposite in the private sector. We'd like to reward success and to incentivize them to do better. But in government, we seem to reward failure.
San Bernardino County is one of the largest counties in America, even covering more ground than some states. Will it secede from California to become a state of its own? Keep watching to see why San Bernardino is not happy with what it's getting from California state. I'm Siamak Kurami. Welcome to California Insider.
And 40% are discretionary by the state government. Then we all apply for those grants and awards, and they go out to whatever way they do it. But there is that process of subjective allocation. And certain state legislators get more money to allocate to their areas than others. So it's not really on a fair basis. It's more political behind the scenes. Who's in power? Who's in that matrix, that committee to get the money out for their district when they do it. And that's the area we want to shine a little light on, is why this is public tax dollars. These are the people's dollars. These are not their dollars or our dollars or the federal government's. For the most part, these are our tax dollars that get reallocated to serve, county services. And for most people don't know that the counties, we're considered a local government, but we're the operators for state and federal policy. What I mean by that is they'll come up and say, hey, we need to take care of foster youth, for example. So we're going to tell the county, you got to do this mission or this job, and here's the money for that. Now, that job should be the same pretty much for every county, but we don't necessarily get the same amount of funding per county. And there should be some formula maybe for cost of living or cost of the employment for those counties, because there's a little bit different living conditions. But it should be pretty straightforward and clear-cut and open to the public so they can see how that formula is done. What we're finding out is not done that way. It's done more in a political sense more than a practical sense. And so we want to shed some light on it with this ballot measure. And we think that with the voice of the residents saying, yes, do this, with the extreme language in there of up to succession in California, that will show how the level of dissatisfaction the residents have with the process that are currently going on.
So even for the same cause you mentioned, a county like yours could get less money, a lot less money than another county. Maybe let's say it's in say San Francisco or LA or.
Absolutely. And even for education, we have thousands of school districts throughout California, and I was starting to look at those just briefly, and my home school district gets about 2/3 what LA Unified gets per student. We have a tendency in California to give more money for failure than success. So when things go bad, we throw more money at it, which is kind of opposite in the private sector. We'd like to reward success and to incentivize them to do better. But in government, we seem to reward failure. And so those areas that may be having a harder time to do it get more resources than the areas that do a better job at it.
You mentioned getting a fair share of the funding, and it seems like the state has a lot of money now. Can you explain to us what kind of funding is available?
Yeah, I'm not a state expert on the state budget, but I will say just for me looking at it, I was a former state legislator 10 years ago, let's say, back under Schwarzenegger and Governor Brown, and our budgets were close to $100 billion for the state. I know this year we're over close to 350 billion or something like that for the state. So it's gone up 3 times in the last decade. 3 times fold. So the state budget is very flush. I wish we could all say that our personal income has raised 3 times in the last 10 years. And
this momentum toward the Republicans, you've got to think a lot of those undecideds are going to fall toward the guy they know and toward someone who's done a good job, and people are largely supportive of his record. 52-53 is really hard in Georgia today. It's really hard to do. And if Brian Kemp manages to get to 54 or 55, that is landslide territory. I mean, a humiliating loss for Stacey Abrams. I'm not saying that he's going to hit that high number, but it is possible. And that in and of itself is amazing.
All right. What are you looking for tomorrow, Thayer?
Well, first of all, I'm looking for voters to turn out. And I think that if you look at these polls, Russ, they're heavily skewed. I think Republicans are pushing them because no one can really dictate this electorate. No one knew that we were going to have 2.5 million people go out and cast their ballots. Matt Tyra, Inside Advantage, reputable guys, but I don't think you can dictate the enthusiasm that's going to come out tomorrow. The second thing I'm going to be looking for is that, look, I think that Republicans have to beat the Democrats tomorrow. I think if you just look at that 2.5 million, you look at the breakdowns, we're still right around 30% as far as African-American voters. Black male voters are up. Black women are turning out. We saw a little bit of a surge late with young people. And so ultimately, I think, look, there's no better person in the state of Georgia that know how to turn out voters better than Stacey Abrams. And so I truly believe that she's got a data-driven solution. She's got a strategy in place to turn out enough Democratic voters to basically, do what she needs to do tomorrow.
All right. Well, it's past his prologue. Charlie Bailey has tried to make.
Well, it is a fair and honest election.
Is he getting any traction?
And there are no barriers. They just want to have food trucks parked on the property.
Drowned out by the Senate and the governor's races, and then all the money that's being poured in
like they did back in 2020.
Candidate that isn't known statewide to really get their message out.
There, which of these
the truth, they did it.
Well, I'm looking at Lieutenant.
that same emergency all room at the same time. And I said, sir, you forget about that. There's a baby in that room as well. You forgot about that baby in that room. But he did not tell you. He did not tell you. He did not tell you that he asking you to pay for it, did he?
We're joined again by our panelists, Lori, Brian, and Theron. The elbows have gotten sharper in the last couple of weeks, haven't they?
They sure have. I don't know where that Raphael Warnock came from the past week and a half, I would say. We didn't see that during the debate. We saw more of a statesman and an orator on the debate stage when he was against Herschel Walker. But, yeah, the gloves have definitely come off, and there were some good one-liners in both of those interviews.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the debate, actually. I mean, I wonder when we look back on this race, how important that debate is going to be. I've talked to some Republicans who told me that they weren't going to vote in this particular race until they saw that debate and thought, well, I think I can vote for Herschel Walker.
It was a watershed moment in this campaign, and if tomorrow night he gets over 50+1 and becomes the U.S. Senator-elect, it will be because of that night. He had to get over that threshold. He had to prove to those who needed convincing that he could talk about issues, that he could stand his own, and that he could look coherent, to be frank. And he did. And in fact, he was not only coherent, he was able to prosecute the case against Raphael Warnock and drive a message. Raphael Warnock owns Joe Biden's record. Anybody watching it could get what Herschel Walker was saying. What was Warnock's message? I don't know. No one knows. He was just playing defense. He didn't do a good job. It's not his setting. He didn't do a good job in the Loeffler debate 2 years ago either. So it's not his strong suit. Lori's right. If we had seen the Raphael Warnock we just saw in those clips on the debate stage, I think we might be in a different spot today.
But I also think Walker's debate strategy was more important than his performance. He set the bar so low that the expectations were so low. So even a mediocre performance on the debate stage would have done really well for Herschel Walker.
The Democrats helped set the low expectations too.
All right, well, let's get Theron into this. Yes.